Hey, everybody, welcome to Bible study. Glad to see each and every one of you on tonight. Appreciate you guys for being here. And so we're going to get started in just a few minutes. I'm excited for our Bible study tonight. I'm looking forward to getting into it. As you come into the room, what I want you to do is if you could do me a favor and just pop in right quick in the chat and let me know that you can actually hear what I'm saying. Right? If you can hear it, just say something. Hey, Miss Trey, I see you. Can you hear me? Do I sound good? All of that good thing. Let me know. Let me know. Can you hear me? Do I sound good? Can you hear me? Do I sound good? That's all I want to know. Then we'll get started. All right. All right. Good. 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 All right. Thank you, Miss Ray. Thank you, Miss Nicole. Okay, cool. All right. So here we go. So we're about to go ahead and get started. Once again, I want to welcome you to our PFBC Wednesday night Bible study. Glad you guys have tuned in with us. We're continuing in our series, How to Not Be My Own Worst Enemy. I hope that as you guys are paying attention to the message on Sunday, that the message is a blessing to each and every one of you. And so if I had someone who hit me the other day, and they were like, man, you really wasn't you when you told us you wasn't playing this message this past Sunday really made me recognize this fella is not playing. And so I'm trying to make sure that we get the best content out to you guys and really break the word down so we can hear it, understand it, and be better. All right. So here's what I want you to do. We started with this series, How to Not Be My Own Worst Enemy. And so again, this is our sermon-based Bible study. Um, and so what we're going to do is we're going to dive back into it, because there's a few things that I left out on Sunday that I really wanted to say and point out. And so we're going to dive into it tonight. And I want to kind of help us see the scriptures and see some things that we need to do from a slightly different vantage point. I think this is going to be helpful. Actually, I think it's going to be really helpful to many of us who struggle with our tongues. In fact, just right quick, how many of you out there just listening, tuning in right now, how many of you actually do struggle with your tongue? Struggle with what you say, not having complete control of it all the time. Anybody out there? How many of you struggle with your tongue, with your speech? You a Christian, but you don't always sound Christian. So all right. Anybody out there? All right. Miss Nicole said no comment. Okay. All right. Miss Trey said yes. All right. Miss V, yeah, I see you. Okay, got you. All right, so this is going to be this then is going to be helpful. So you might want to tag somebody else in, somebody with a horrible mouth. You might want to tag them in tonight. All right. So here we go. James chapter 3. Okay, let's head over there. James chapter 3. All right, James chapter 3. And I'm going to be reading from the NIV version, I believe. James chapter 3. Once again, thank you for joining in. And want to remind everybody, we are testing, right? We are testing. So hopefully next week, I was working on it this week, but I didn't quite get it finished. So next week, we're going to try another thing where I can share my screen, and I'm going to bring in I'm going to introduce you guys to PowerPoint. And so we'll do our studies through PowerPoint and see how that goes. And then after that, I'm going to try to connect a handout to it so everybody can have a handout. We'll have PowerPoint, and we'll be looking like a classroom up in here in a minute. All right. So here we go. James chapter 3. And so we'll read through it one time and then I'll come back and then I'll highlight some things. So it says this: we all stumble in many ways. If anyone is never at fault in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to keep his whole body in check. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the ship is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire, a world of evil. Among the parts of the body, it corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of his life on fire. Wow. And is itself set on fire by hell. It's a cold piece. Verse 7. Uh, all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and creatures of the sea are being tamed and have been tamed by man, but no man can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. With the tongue we praise our Father and Lord, and with it we curse men who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursings, my brothers. This should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. All right. So this is James' monologue, if you will, on the concept of the tongue or the mouth. Right. He's talking about us speaking, how we speak. And how we use the mouths that God has given us. And so if we come back up to the top, I want to kind of walk this down and break it down in a little bit smaller fashion, because that's a lot. And by the time you read it, especially if you have an issue talking, an issue with your mouth, an issue controlling your tongue, you'll probably feel pretty bad as we go through it. And you probably feel pretty bad anyway, even if we slow it down. But there's hope. Okay, here we go. So James says this: we all stumble in many ways, right? So here's the first part. Here's the first part of the great equalizer, right? Because the tendency is for people who have more difficulty with their mouth than other people, the tendency is that people who have more control of their tongue, sometimes we got to be careful of one-upsmanship, right? We have to be careful of making people feel bad because they still have a struggle that we don't really have. And the way that we deal with that is in the first verse. James tells you before we get into this, he says, we all, right? Underline that word all. James says, we all stumble in many ways, right? Is what he says. We all stumble in many ways. And then he says, if anyone is never at fault in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to keep his whole body in check. Here's what James just said. Don't ever think that you're better than somebody else, because the reality is, even though somebody may have a huge issue with their tongue, your tongue is not too saved either. Right? All of us have heathen tongues floating around here, is what James is getting at. And how do you know? Because James says, if you're still sinning, right? If you still have a sin life, if you still sin somewhere in life, he says, what comes with that is a bad mouth, is a bad tongue. Because the reality is, he says this: if I were able to tame my mouth, if I could just get my mouth together, James says, your body would follow, right? If anyone is never at fault in what he says, he is a perfect man. right? And so what James is doing is he's using the tongue as a measuring rod. And what he's saying is, like, nobody could ever look down on someone else for their struggle, especially again if their struggle is they're trying to get their mouth together. Like, we cannot look down on each other because we struggle speaking. Like, we can't, because the reality is, see, here's the thing: I may not cuss, but I may gossip though, and I may not gossip, but I may throw shade, right? And I may not cuss you out or gossip, but listen, my sarcasm game is on point, right? And so I may not cuss, I may not swear, I may not take God's name in vain, but listen, my disrespect game, like, you can't beat me disrespecting anybody. Right? I may not cuss. I may not disrespect you. I may not gossip. I may not do any of that stuff. Oh, but my lying game, right? My ability to put one over the plate on you. Oh, listen. Some of us lie really, really well, right? And so what he's getting at is, he said, like, don't like, we got to be careful not to be looking down on other people, because the reality is all of us have a tongue problem. All of us have a mouth problem, right? It just shows up in different ways, shape, forms, and fashions. And so he says, if anyone is never at fault in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to keep his whole body in check, right? Verse 3, watch what he says. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can control the whole animal. Talked about that on Sunday, right? Verse 4. Or take ships. Okay, and I want to slow down here. I want you to underline some stuff. Watch this. Take ships as an example. Although they are, and I want you to underline these next two words: so large, right? Although they are so large and they are driven by strong winds, they are, underline this word, steered. Okay, steered by a very, underline this, small rudder, wherever the pilot wants it to go. Did you get that? You missed it. I give it to you again. Watch this. He says, take, for example, the ships, right? When you look at a ship, and he says, although they are so large, and you gotta listen, pay attention to what the author is doing. The author is comparing and contrasting, and he does this with a series of words. He says, although the ships are large, right? He's drawing our attention. He wants us to see the largeness of the ship. He wants us to see the bigness of the ship. He wants us to see the immensity of the ship. And he says, even though the ship is large and huge, it's a major, this major hunk of metal, right? He said, or back then it was wood. He says, although they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are steered, right? Again, steered. They are steered by a small, right? Small rudder. See, small. So he's contrasting large with small. This large ship is controlled by something small. And not only is the large ship controlled by something small, it is steered. In other words, the small thing steers this whole big thing, right? So you have something that's about you have I don't have nothing around. So you have something. This is my little earplug. So you have something this small, right? And picture something like this small, moving an entire house, right? Is what he's saying, which means this, right? Which means this, and I want you to understand this. Your tongue, right? And write this down somewhere. Your tongue, he says, it is steered by a very small. No, he says it is steered by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot, underline this, wants it to go. Right. So your tongue, my tongue, our tongues are directors. Okay, let that sink in. Our tongues, our are directors. I know, Miss Trey, I got to get better props. Our tongues are directors. Okay. What does a director do? A director tells something what to go or what to do, where to go or what to do. That's a director. And so what James is trying to help us understand is that your tongue is a director. Your tongue directs your tongue literally directs your life, right? Where you're headed in life, you're headed there because of your tongue, according to James. Because your tongue is a director. Notice what else he says. Verse 5. Likewise, the tongue is here's our words again, small, right? Notice what he's doing. Small part of the body, but it makes great, right? Underline that, boast. So small part, but big boast. Small part, great boast. Small part, great boast. Consider what a great forest, right? So now he wants us to picture a forest, the vastness of a forest, the largeness of a forest. He says is set on fire by a, underline, small spark. Okay? Small spark. So in other words, watch this, our tongue is small but has big influence. Okay? The tongue, it is small with big gargantuan influence. Okay? James says you can take a spark out to the forest and you can light a spark. And listen to me, and we're familiar with this in California, right? Because we got fires all the time. James says you can go out in the forest, light a spark, hit a spark, and you hit that spark, and you have a whole forest that catches on fire, right? Messes up everything, messes up the state, people dying, people losing homes, insurance companies going bankrupt, like all type of stuff, and it messes up stuff for years, right? It messes up the weather. Everybody's breathing in this stuff that's not good. It's messing up visibility for everybody. It's dangerous to be over there. People end up homeless. People get their money messed up behind all of this stuff. Everything burns down. It burns down people's valuables, right? Like when you think about all of that stuff that happens when you have a forest fire and that thing kind of gets out of hand, James wants us to understand that the same devastation in life is also caused by the human tongue. So the tongue and the tongue, like the tongue is not huge and big. Tongue is real small, right? But literally it has the ability to set everything on fire and mess it up for everybody. That's the tongue, right? That's the tongue. And so he says this, verse number 6, he says the tongue is also a fire, right? A world of evil. So write this down. Your tongue can be a treasure trove, right? Or a treasure chest of evil. Okay? The tongue can be a treasure chest of evil. All right. See, think about it this way. And isn't this true, right? Just think about it. Isn't this true? Isn't it true that almost every kind of evil that we know of can come from what we say? Right? Isn't that true? Like haven't we messed up families because of our talk? Churches because of our talk? Friendships because of our talk? Marriage because of our talk? Right? Haven't we messed up a lot of stuff simply because of what we say, how we say, when we say? Right? Isn't that true? And so he says this. He says the tongue, he says this thing is a world of evil. And then he says, among the parts of the body, it corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of his life on fire. Oh my God. And is itself set on fire by hell. Right? It's a gold piece. So in other words, watch this, write this down. The tongue can be a destroyer of life. Did you get that? The tongue can be a destroyer of life. So let's stop, go back. I want to make sure you got the list so far. So number one, the tongue is a director. Number two, the tongue is a small part, but it holds big influence. Number three, the tongue is a treasure trove or a treasure chest of evil. Number four, the tongue is a destroyer of life. Three more, and we moving on. Here we go. Verse 7. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and creatures of the sea are being tamed and have been tamed by man, but no man can tame the tongue. The tongue is, write this down, untamable. Okay? The tongue is untamable, meaning that you can never get full control of it, right? You can manage it better. The tongue is sort of like a tiger, right? It's kind of like this is probably a good example. It's kind of like a tiger. And if you've ever seen, and I've seen a bunch of footage where you have trainers who are training tigers and that kind of thing, and so a good trainer will have their tigers trained, and they'll tell them what to do, and the tigers will do it, and that kind of thing, and they do the whip with the chair, and and they got all type of little things that they do to kind of trigger the tigers and to move them here, move them there, and all that. But if you keep watching and you pay attention long enough, every now and then, right? Listen, that tiger gonna recognize and realize, hey, I'm a tiger. And who is this fella trying to tell me what to do? And because you can train a tiger, listen carefully. You can train a tiger, but you can't tame a tiger. Let's get that in. You can train a tiger, but you can't tame a tiger. And the tongue is like that. You can train your tongue, but you can't tame that thing. Every now and then, listen, he finna get loose. Blah, 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 blah. Filth, flarn, filth. Like, it's just, you can train it, but you're not going to be able to tame it. That's just not the nature of it. It's not how this works. And James makes pulls no punches about it. James says that the tongue is untamable, right? And we talked about why the tongue is untamable, because ultimately, right, like the tongue is connected to the heart. Like we did a whole big thing on that on Sunday. I'm coming back to that this Sunday. But James lets us know that the tongue is untamable, and ultimately it's untamable because the tongue is connected to the heart. And Jeremiah says that our hearts are beyond cure. And so if our hearts are beyond cure and our mouths are connected to our hearts, hence that is why the tongue is untamable, because the hearts can be better, but they don't get cured. Okay. And so that's the issue. That's the difficulty. That's the problem with the tongue. So watch this. Verse 8. But no man can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. I almost forgot this. This is also a part of number 5, because number 5 is it is untamable, but also, and this is another part of number 5. It is also unpredictable. That's the word I'm looking for. The tongue is unpredictable. Kind of like if you got to go back to that whole tiger thing, right? For the most part, you can trust it when you train it. But like the whole, you guys remember the Siegfried and Roy, right? The people who work with the tigers, and then all of a sudden the tiger, after 30 years, the tiger was like, "Hey, I'm a tiger," right? and put your boy in his whole mouth, right? And messed him up for life. And so because you can work with it, but you can't rely on it. The tongue is unpredictable. That's really the key. It's unpredictable. And then we'll talk about what do you do about that a little bit later. So then verse 9, with the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in God's likeness, which means this, that the tongue is contradictory too. Right? Tongue is contradictory. It has a tendency to be hypocritical. Our tongue has the tendency to be very, very, very hypocritical. Then he says, verse 10, out of the same mouth come praise and cursing, my brother. This should not be, right? That's that contradictory stuff. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? And like I said on Sunday, right? Like most of us don't understand this because we don't live in the country. We don't live in areas where we get our waters from springs and, different water sources like that. But this is a very, very, very big thing for the people who lived in this day and time, because they didn't have spigots that they could go to and cut the water on and the water came out. No, these people got their water from particular sources, and they had to be very, very careful about where they got their water, because just going and getting raw water flowing somewhere, you got to make sure that this water is drinkable. You have to make sure that it's not filled with all kind of stuff, and then you have to make sure that it's not salt water or brackish, because you'll fool around and kill yourself drinking salt water or brackish water. And so for them, when you went and got some water that was fresh water, listen to me, where you go to get fresh water is in a completely different place from where you go to get salt water. Again, we don't understand that, but this is true in terms of the culture. This is what you would call cultural contextual, historical cultural contextual analysis, right? In terms of how you interpret scripture. There's no way for the way that these people understood this. When James said this, they got exactly what he was saying, because where you go and get water is like way over here. And where you go to get salt water is like way over there. They're two completely different places. You don't have salt water here and then fresh water here, and then maybe it gets mixed up. That's not what James is conveying. What he's saying is literally these two things come from two different places. So when James talks about out of the mouth, verse 10, come praise and cursings, he says, my brother, this should not be, right? He says it shouldn't be. Why? Because the praise, that's fresh water. And the fresh water comes from way over here. But then the cursing is salt water. That comes from way over here. And there's no way that you can be in both places at the same time. There's no way that you can get both things from the same place. And so what James says, and this is why he says this shouldn't be. Like, why? Again, this is contradictory. This shouldn't happen. This should never be for a believer in Jesus Christ, right? Not for a follower of Jesus. No, James says this should never happen, because when you look at it naturally, you don't get these two things from the same place. You don't get blessings from the same place cursings come from. They should not come out of the same spigot, right? Which is our mouths, because there's two different sources for them. Two completely different sources. And so he says, verse 12, my brothers, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Again, he's driving home the same point, right? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. See what I'm saying? If you have a salt spring, you're not going to get fresh water out of it. If you have a pear tree, you're not going to get apples out of it. And okay, here's another thing that James is also helping us understand. Not only are our mouths contradictory and hypocritical, our mouths are also unnatural. They defy nature. Right? So the mouth, when we praise God, like, and I'm sure, right? How many of us have been to church? And we kind of say this, right? You be in church, you be in there praising God, and folks lifting their hands and dancing and shouting and hallelujah, thank you, Jesus, hallelujah, right? And then somebody step on somebody's toe, right? Filth, flooring, and filth. James says, wait a minute. right? And what James wants us to do is he actually is pushing us to pick, right? Are you at the freshwater source really? Or are you at the salty water source really? See? Are you at the salty water source pretending you're at the freshwater source? Right? But you're really at the saltwater source? Right? Or are you really at the freshwater source? Like which one is it? Right? And so James kind of pushes us to make a decision. And so the tongue can be it's unnatural. It's not it's broken. That thing don't work right. right? Is what James is getting at. So the question is, what do you like? What do we do about that? Like, how do we handle that, right? How do we maintain? How do we manage being able to handle the difficulty of our tongue? Okay, so here's what I need for you to do. Turn with me to Ephesians, Ephesians chapter 4, right? Ephesians chapter 4. Okay. I want to show you something. Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. If you when you find it, just throw your hand up in the chat, give me a thumbs up, let me know. Just say got it, got it, whatever. So I'll know when to start. Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. All right, let me know when you got it. Ephesians 4. Ephesians 4. Hey, Miss Topaz, good evening. Welcome. Ephesians chapter 4. You got it? Okay, good. I see the thumbs up coming in. Good. Okay, so here we go. Pick me up. Ephesians 4, pick me up at verse pick me up at verse 17. Okay, pick me up at verse 17. Now, let me explain Ephesians for you right quick. Ephesians is a book where, so it's a book written to the church at Ephesus, obviously, right? But the way that the book is constructed, it's constructed in two parts. Okay, chapters 1, 2, and 3 are neatly constructed as theology. Okay, so you learn theology in chapters 1, 2, and 3. You'll learn about God. You'll learn theology proper in Ephesians 1. And then you'll learn Christology also, right? Which is about Christ. You'll study about Christ. And then you'll learn about pneumatology, which is the study about the Holy Spirit. And so, and then also, then there's ecclesiology, right? Study of the church. That's also in there as well. There's soteriology, right, which is the study of salvation. And so there's a bunch of different theological doctrinal things that are packed into Ephesians chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. Starting in chapter 4, though, chapter 4 switches from theology to practicality. Right? And so we move from doctrine to practice. And so it's almost as if Paul is saying, here's how you should think and believe. Chapters 1, 2, 3. Now, since we think and believe that, here's how we should act. Right? Chapters 4, 5, and 6. And so 4, 5, and 6 are the chapters. These are action chapters. These are the chapters where we learn how to live. These are the chapters where we learn what to do based upon what we say we believe. So Paul says, here's what you should believe. Now, if you actually believe this, then it should produce this, right? Is what he's saying. So that's chapters 4, 5, and 6. Is everybody with me? So pick me up. He says, matter of fact, pick me up verse 17. Paul says this. So I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. You see right there? Notice he's already in it. He's already shifting in verse 17. He shifted way before, but he's digging into his shift. Because notice what he says, and I want you to underline some stuff. He says, so I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do. Now, the word Gentile, okay, is being used in a different way here. The word Gentile meant in biblical days, it meant someone who was a non-Jew. Okay, someone who was not Jewish in nature. You were something else, but you weren't Jewish. The word Gentile began to take on, as the church age became about, the word Gentile began to take on a different nuance of meaning. And the word Gentile began to be referenced as anyone who did not have a covenant relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Okay. So if you were not, so in other words, if you wasn't saved, right, they would refer to you as Gentiles, right? Whereas before, when the revelation was only about being Jewish and the Messiah was coming and the Messiah had not came, if you were a Gentile, it simply meant that you were not a Jew. You were not in covenant fellowship with God through the Jewish line. But after Christ had come, the word Gentile took on a different meaning, which meant that, if you didn't have a covenant relationship with God through Jesus Christ, you were considered a Gentile. So he says this, verse 17, I tell you this, and I insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do. In other words, he's talking to people who are saved. He's talking to Christians. And in talking to Christians, he says, you guys have to stop living like people who don't have a covenant relationship with God. Right? Why? And why would he say that? Because he had a group of people who were living their lives as Christians, but you couldn't tell the difference between them and people who didn't know God. And so Paul says, okay, based upon everything I just told you about this guy Jesus and about, salvation and theology and Christology and so all that stuff that we just learned, Paul says this is how it needs to start looking, right? This is how your lives need to start looking. So he says, so I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord. I like how Paul does that, right? Paul just throws Jesus in there as a little schmooze over, right? He says, and I insist on it in the Lord. I like that. He says that you must no longer live your lives as the Gentiles do, as the unsaved people do, in the futility of their thinking, right? And then he says, verse 18, they are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. In other words, they're closed off to what God is revealing. They're closed off to the idea of living the way God wants them to live. They're closed off to it, right? Is what he's getting at in verse 18. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Verse 19, having lost all sensitivity. Underline that, okay? Underline that. Having lost all sensitivity. They have given themselves over to sensuality. That's all type of sexual stuff. So as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed. One version says, and they do it with greed, right? And so I want you to underline, having lost all sensitivity. That, woo. When he says having lost all sensitivity, what that means, that means so many things on so many different levels. But having lost all sensitivity means you no longer feel. Right? You've gotten to the point in life where you don't feel. And one of the most dangerous places a Christian could ever be is when we get to a place in life where we don't feel when we do wrong. Right? When our mouths can just go and we don't even feel it anymore. When we can do the things we do and not feel it though. Oh man, because having lost all sensitivity is not a description of saints. That's a description of sinners. And that should never be a description of saints. So he says, having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed. Verse 20. That, however, watch what he says. That, however, is not the way of life you learned. Right? This, in other words, that's not how you should be. Right? Our lives should look qualitatively different than how other people's lives who don't know Christ look. So there should, in other words, you should be able to tell the difference between a believer and a non-believer just by watching how we live. Right? Just by that alone is what Paul is saying. Verse 20. That, however, is not the way of life you learned. When you heard about Christ and were taught in him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus, verse 22, you were taught with regard to your former way of life, watch this, to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitudes of your mind, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. Did you get that? Notice when Paul talks about the old self, right? And all of us we still have the old self, right? We do. We still have the old self. If you don't think you got your old self, you are lying to yourself. You still have your old self. But what Paul says is this: the old self and the new self, he words it this way. He says they're like garments, right? They're like garments. In other words, he says the old self, right? So this is the old self, right? So this is the idea. This is my old self, right? So I'm I can't make that bigger. Okay, so this is my old self, right? This garment. This is my old self. Okay, this is how I work. This is how I get down. This is how I function. This is how I talk. Right? It's my old self. But then the way Paul words it is he says, take off the old self. See, and this is a little different than how many of us see our salvation, than how many of us see our sanctification. Right? Our thing is always, I'm working on it. Right? I'm working on something. And I get that. I understand what we're trying to say. But let's just stick with the text. Paul says, take it off. He says, pull it off. Right? He says, pull that thing off. Right? Now, then what you do, right? He says, take off the old self. Then he says, put on the new self. Right? I got to put my new self on. See my new self. Right? My new self. Right? My new self. Right? He says, put on the new self. And he talks about our dispositions in life. He talks about our salvation, like our salvation is clothing. And he says, put one on, take one off. Now, here's the problem with many of us, and here's what we're working on, right? I'm gonna tell you what we're working on. This is what we're working on. Many of us, we've done this, right? Many of us have done this. We have put on the old self, right? This is the old self. That's where we came from. But then what many of us do is we put the new self on top of the old self, right? And what ends up happening is, listen, we got two selves. we got two selves up in here, right? I got my new self floating through here, and then I got my old self down here. And guess what? My old self is making me hot. Right? My old self is making me hot. It's making me sweat. And we're disobeying the text because the text doesn't say put the new self on top of the old self. The text says take off the old self and put on the new self. And so some of us, if this is not how we look, right? Others of us, we look like this, right? Show you how we look. We look like this. We look like, right? So I got on my old self, and then here's what we look like, right? We got the new self, and he said put on the new self. So we just right? That's what we rocking it like this. Right? So depending on how you see me, depending on how you look at me, that's who you gonna get. Right? so I'm telling you, we're and the way but the way Paul words it though, he says, take off the old before you put on the new. Right? And so that's why I'm telling you, that's why we struggling. That is exactly why most people and Christians are funny. I'm telling you, we are funny because here's what we do as Christians. As Christians, we tell people, "Oh, I'm working on it." Right? I'm working on that. But guess what we do? Let me tell you what we do. Guess what we do? If you ask me in 10 years, right? In 10 whole years, if you ask me in 10 years about the same thing, I'm going to tell you the same thing. I'm working on it. I'm still working on that. I'm working on that. And I'm going to tell you why. Because it is impossible, right? It is impossible to merge the new with the old. It's impossible. It's impossible to have both of these on, listen to me, at the exact same time and be okay. Right? It's impossible. You can't, like, this is not a good look. Right? It's not like this, like this. It's not a good look. Right? And this is why the Christian life is frustrating for us. Frustrating. It is frustrating because we're trying to put the new self on the old self, and we're trying to do it without ever slowing down long enough to take off the old self. All right? Now, keep flowing with me. Here we go. And now, if we ever get the old self off, right, just take him off. Now, it doesn't mean, now you got to understand this, right? Because some people say, well, I took it off, but it for some reason, it keep coming back on. Yeah, you're right? You know. But here's what you need to do. Instead of having the old self on and then putting the new self on top of it, what we need to do is take off the old self and then put the new self on first. Because once we have the new self on first, the new self that's what's closest to our body. That's the default. And so the only thing I'm working on is I'm working on taking this off or leaving it off. If I could just take this off for a minute and put this on, trust me, this is coming back, but it can't be the first thing that's on. Right? Hopefully that makes sense. There's a whole practical piece that I need that I can do with that to make it make sense, right, in a very practical way. But I'm kind of hoping and praying that God is translating all of this in your life and in your head, so that when you see what I'm doing, it actually makes sense, right? So he says in verse 25. Here we go, verse 25. He says, therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. Now, here we go. Here's what I want you to write down. How do you get control of your tongue? Because James just made us feel super bad about what our tongues are and how our tongues function. And so the question is, how do I get control of my tongue? How do I handle my tongue when my tongue is out of control. In fact, how do I stop my tongue from getting out of control? Right? How do I do it? Here we go. Number one, you have to think before you speak. Okay? Let that sink in. You have to think before you speak. Think before you speak. The Bible says it this way: be quick to listen and slow to speak. And many of us, we got way too much to say way too fast. One of the things I tell couples all the time is this: don't conclude before you understand. Right? You cannot come to a conclusion before you understand. I get couples all the time, and somebody will be mad at somebody else, and somebody is, this, that, or the other. And I'll ask them, I'm like, well, why are you mad? Well, what did you get mad at? And they'll say, well, blah, 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 blah. And then I'll come back and I'll ask, like, is that what you meant? And the person will be like, nope. And and it's like, wait. So you got mad for nothing, right? Because you concluded before you understood, right? And so the first thing, listen, you got to think before you run in your mouth. Think before you speak. Think. Take some time, slow down, think. Now, what do I mean? I'm going to use think as an acronym. So here we go. T in think stands for truthful. Okay? You want to be truthful. Look at verse 25 again. Now, again, this is Paul talking to believers after he just taught us in chapters 1, 2, and 3 how to believe, what to think, right? He just taught us theology in 1, 2, and 3. And then he starts in chapter 4 with, now this is how you should live. And then we just read the whole piece where he says, don't live like the unsaved people do. Don't do that. Right? And then he walks us down through that whole piece. And then we come down to verse 25, and verse 25 says, therefore, right? Therefore, a conclusionary term. In other words, because of everything I just told you about taking off the old self and putting on the new self, and no longer living like the Gentiles live in the futility of their minds, and because their hearts are darkened and they done lost all feeling. And like he says, therefore, right? Since I've just explained all of that to you, he says, each of you, right? Each of you, say that with me. Each of you. Okay? Say that with me. Each of you. Let me tell you who he's talking about. You and me. Right? He says, each of you must put off falsehood. Okay? Put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. Right? He says you have to put off falsehood. Now, for many of us, right, especially, a lot of us, we see this as lying. That's kind of how we default. You stop lying, right? But that's just one part of what he means, right? That's just one part. Sometimes lying, well, I mean, we need to stop lying, but there's more to put off falsehood than what we understand. When he says put off falsehood, what he's saying is stop being fake. Right? So if something's wrong and somebody says, what's wrong? And then you say, I'm good, nothing. Like, stop put off falsehood. Right? Put off falsehood, because there is a problem. This is a push for us as believers to be emotionally authentic, to own how we feel. And he says, put off falsehood and speak truthfully. Right? Speak truthfully. And so there's a way you feel. Say that. There's a way you think. Say that. Right? Now, for many of us, When you hear me say that, what you see in your head is sparks flying. And I'll tell you why in a minute. I'll tell you why you hear sparks flying, right? Why you see sparks flying. The number one reason that we hear or see sparks flying is because one of the most, in order to do what Paul is about to suggest we do through these scriptures, we got to stop being selfish. And there's a whole other piece that we didn't read in here where Paul gets at our selfishness. Because the reality is, if someone speaks truth, I have to honor the fact that that's how they feel. I have to allow you to feel how you feel and not be mad because you feel. Right? The same way I would want you to do for me. And so he says, put off falsehood. And the number one reason, let me tell you what, the number one reason we're false and fake is because we're avoiding conflict and we're avoiding pain. That's what we're doing. We're avoiding pain. We just don't want to deal with the repercussions that come from us saying what it is we want to say. That's really the problem, right? And here's what happens. Like this is not a like this is an imperative, is what he's saying. This is an imperative. In other words, this is how we should live. This is not a suggestion. This is how we should live. He says, therefore, each of you, notice, must. He says, must put off false. Now, I want to say this. I don't have this mastered, right? And I just want to say that because when we start getting into stuff like this, the tendency is for you guys to feel guilty because I'm presenting it and I'm presenting it in a forceful way. And just because I present it in a forceful way, the tendency is that you think I have it mastered. I don't. Right? I don't. But I can't not teach the text. Right? I got to teach the text. I'm a student too. So he says this, because sometimes I'm preaching or teaching and I say something and I'm like, boy, that was good right there. Right? God, teach myself sometimes. So therefore, each of you, he says, must put off falsehood and speak truthfully. Right? Speak truthfully to your, dang, it's 8:00 already. And speak truthfully to your neighbor, right? Speak truth. In other words, and these two things, and I want you to write this down, right? I want you to write this down. If it's not true, don't say it. Okay? That's the first way you train your mouth. If it's not true, don't say it. If you don't know it's true, stop talking. If you can't verify it's true, be quiet. See, that's how rumors get started. That's how feelings get hurt. Because we go saying stuff that we heard somebody say to somebody else when they were saying what they were saying. No, if it's not true, like, don't say it. And then here's the second thing I want you to write down. Write this down. If it's true, watch this, you must say it. Ooh. That's a tough one, right? If it's true, you must say it. Because he says, you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor. That must there in the text is covering it's covering the same two actions. Put off falsehood and speak truth. The must refers to both of those things, right? So if it's not true, don't say it. If it's true, you must say it. I can already see y'all like, I'll join Coleman next week. Right? Stay with me. I promise you we're going to get through this. Here we go. H, right? Think. H. T is for truthful. H. Is it helpful? Right? Is it helpful? Watch Ephesians 4:29. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is, underline this, helpful. Helpful. Right? Helpful. Right? For building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And so the question is, if you're going to say something, right? If you're going to let something come out of your mouth, here's a question that, should I say it or not say it? Well, here's a question. Is it helpful? Right? Does it help? See? Is it helpful? Watch this. And the question is it helpful? And watch the context of it. But only what is helpful for building others up. Oh, so this has nothing to do with it being helpful for me to get something off of my chest. Remember I told you about selfishness? See, is it helpful? And some of us, we've already concluded, well, yeah, it's helping me. It's helping me to get it off my chest. No, that's not the emphasis. The emphasis is on other people. The emphasis is on the person that I'm interacting with. And so the question is, what I'm about to say to them, is it helpful? Is it going to help them? Is it helpful for them for me to say what I want to say? And if not, I probably need to keep it to myself. Well, or maybe I should just tell somebody else. Well, why? Is it going to be helpful for them? See, listen, right? Some of y'all bow. You just feeling like this, bow. I'm sorry, but here we go. Right? H, is it helpful? And you might want to ask this question, right? What is my true intention? Right? In other words, what am I trying to do? If you're going to say something, you're going to say something to somebody, you're going to share something with somebody, you might want to ask this question. What am I trying to accomplish? Right? What is my intention? Is it just to get somebody told, or is it to help them? Right? Watch what's next. I, T-H-I. I is for inspirational. Same verse. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up. According to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. There's nothing in there about us. Everything in there is about somebody else. And what he says is, and here's the question. Here's the question that you want to ask. If I say what I'm about to say, does it build up or tear down? Right? Does this build up or does this tear down? Right? You're a constructor. You're a contractor, and your words build things, and your words tear down things. Are you doing construction or demolition today? Because the text says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs. Oh, so now I got to pay attention. I have to pay attention. Watch this. I have to pay attention to what people need in order to know what to say to them to build them up. So in other words, I can't just have a bunch of quick sayings that I drop off to people thinking that I'm building them up, because each buildup is customized to the person. Remember what I said about selfishness? That it may benefit those who listen, right? And then in, right? In, T-H-I-N. In stands for necessary. Is it necessary? What I'm about to say, what I'm about to share, what I'm about to spout, right? Is it necessary? Okay. Watch what he says. Same verse. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only that which is helpful for building others up according to their needs, according to their needs. So the question is, does this need to be said? What I'm about to say, does it need to be said? And is it even relevant to the conversation at hand? Right? So is it necessary? Do I need to say this? Okay. Is what I'm about to say necessary, or could I not say it and have the same effect? Right? That's N. Now, K, last one, right? And we're done. Last one. THINK. Here it is. Is it kind? K is for kind. Is it kind? Jump back up to Ephesians 4, verse 15. We started at 17. We didn't read 15 because I just wanted to save it for this. Watch what he says in verse 15. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into him who is the head, that is Christ. Whew. There it is. Right? He says, see, now here's another reason why we hear sparks. Right? We hear sparks. When you heard me say under T, truthfulness, right? That if it's true, you must say it. And I'm telling you, I know what was going on in many of you guys' heads, sparks. And you're like, oh my God, this is gonna, I don't know about that, Pastor. Right. you ready. You ready for me. And I'm telling you, the issue is not what, listen carefully. The issue most often, 99% of the time, the issue is not what you have to say. It's how you have to say it. People, listen carefully, people do not tend to object to truth. People object to nasty truth. People object to dirty truth. People object to arrogant truth. People object to judgmental truth. People don't object to truth. People object to how we give truth. And if we could ever master how we give it, you would never have a problem with being truthful. Right? Now, there's a whole other teaching that I need to do on how we need to learn, how we need to hear, right? So because we did all of this from the perspective of the speaker, I need to do something on the perspective of the hearer, but that's another sermon series and that's another day, right? But from the perspective of the speaker, we have to speak the truth, but we have to speak the truth in love. And here's the problem with speaking the truth in love. The problem with speaking the truth in love is that we don't love. That's the problem. Because love is all about the next person. And if I could ever be willing to get out of my feelings and ever be willing to give up on my rights and put myself in somebody else's shoes to feel what they feel and to think what they think and to understand what they understand and how they understand it, I could move myself, because I still got to tell them this truth, but I could move myself and present it in a way that just may be helpful for them, because I'm giving it to them in a way that is kind. Right? And so here's the question you want to ask about K, right? Here's the question. How would I want someone how would I want someone to approach me with this information? How about that? Right? You have something that you want to share with someone else, right? Maybe maybe somebody breath stank, right? And you just can't stand it no more, right? And you feeling bad for them because they going around, and then you see people kind of doing this, right? And you got to tell them they breath stink, right? Now, there's a couple ways to do that, right? You can say, your breath stink, right? That's the way to say it, right? Um, but no, just how would you want someone to tell you your breath is humming, right? What's a good way, right? Sometimes you can do that without words. Sometimes you just pull out a piece of gum and then start chewing on it, and then hey, you want a piece, right? And then if they say no, 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 then you could say you might need a piece, right? You just told them they breath stank, but you did it in such a nice way, right? And they will recognize that, oh, you tried to do it in such a way where you didn't even have to bring up stinky breath, right? You tried that, and then I shot you down because I can't smell my own breath. So, so again, the question is how do I want someone to approach me with the information that I'm going to approach them with? And once I extrapolate that, once I understand that, we just might make some headway in this, right? And get control of our tongues. And guess what? When we get control of our tongues, James says, you start to get control of the rest of your body too. So getting control of your tongue is not just about your speech. Getting control of your tongue is about getting control of your life. All right. Thank you guys for coming. Give me a few minutes. I know we're a little bit over 15 minutes. So if you have any questions, just type out the word question and then put your question next to that so I know that it's a question. And then we'll take questions for just a few minutes, and then we'll pray and let everyone go. Appreciate you guys tuning in tonight. Hopefully this was a blessing to each and every one of you. And so if you have any questions for me, just type out the word question and then put your question next to the word question, and I'll answer it. Make sure it's on topic though. you know, like, don't be asking me about, eschatological projections. I don't know. right. Okay. So how do you respond to question? How do you respond to sinu? What is sinu? What is sinu? Somebody help me. I know. There's a word sinew, which is like a tissue. It's a in Bible times that was another word for the tissues of the body. But I'm not sure what that means. Sinew. If you could retype it, and someone who asks how you're doing and you are just not ready to respond yet. Oh, okay, good. Yeah. So there's got to be a way for me to put this on the bigger screen, so I'm not having y'all look in my nose. And so yeah, Miss Reed, that's a great question. If somebody is asking you something and you're not ready to talk about it, just say that, right? Because that's truthful. Just say that, and just say, there is an issue, but I don't want to talk about it right now, and I would appreciate if you would give me a little space, and then we can talk about it a little later, right? That's always appropriate, rather than just saying nothing, right? Because oftentimes what will happen is this: depending upon where people are emotionally, once you say nothing, they check out. And then when you come back with something, you're going to cause a bigger problem, because they're going to call you on, well, I asked you, and then you said, but now it's something, right? And so now we're on a whole different argument. So yeah, if someone is doing that and they're asking, hey, what's going on, and you don't feel like talking about it, just say, I got an issue and I need some time to process it. So if you can give me some time, think about it, I'll come back and then I'll share with you what's going on. Right. That's always appropriate. Okay. Um, any other questions? If you do tell the truth in love, but the wait, hold on. If you do, okay, so make sure you guys put question behind your questions because I'm looking for the word question and then the question. Just so you know. All right. So if you do tell the truth in love, but that person still doesn't want to hear it, what do we do? Nothing. Nothing. We've done our due diligence. We've done our job. That's the only requirement. The requirement is to speak the truth in love. See, one of the things that we have to be careful of but thinking that doing the right thing produces the right outcome. Right? We cannot control outcomes. We're responsible for our actions. Right? We're responsible for doing the right thing. And when we do the right thing and someone doesn't receive us doing the right thing the right way, listen, I've done what I was supposed to do. And at that point, the ball is in their court. See, and once the ball is in their court, they're responsible for they're responsible for dribbling at that point. Um, yeah, they're responsible for dribbling. You're only responsible for doing your part. And I know that's a real question, like a serious question, because I've had it done to me where I had a conversation with someone one time and I told them I didn't want to have the conversation with them, and I told them because I said and I told them because I had to have a conversation with someone about them. And it was about how they handle information. And I told him, I says, I need to say this to you, but I don't want to say this to you because I'm afraid that if I tell you what I tell you, I'm going to become your new enemy. Um, and that's not what I'm intending. I want to help. I want to be a help. I want to be a support. Right. And I laid it out and told them what I needed to tell them. And like you said, in love, approaching them, did everything, kid gloves, whole nine. And from that day to right now, I'm still the enemy. But I did what I was supposed to do. It's not on me at that point. And so this does not exist without risk, just so you know. It doesn't exist without risk. Um, but we have to be obedient to truth. Um, so hopefully that makes sense. Um, um, Someone who asks, "How are you doing?" Oh, no. Okay. I'm too far down. Okay, here we go. Miss Loretta, you are welcome. Thank you for tuning in. What if you're never ready to talk about it? Okay, all right, Ben, I got you. What if you're never ready to talk about it? That's probably a bit more of a nuanced conversation, uh, meaning trying to figure out why someone is never ready to talk about it. Because there's only a couple of scenarios that I can picture in my head that someone is where someone is never ready to talk about it. And again, I'm saying it from the standpoint of the speaker, not from the standpoint of the hearer. If you're asking the question from the standpoint of the hearer, towards someone who's speaking, then you got to let me know because I'm going to address this from the standpoint of the speaker. So if I'm a speaker and there's something that I need to say or have to say, and I never am ready to say it, um, one of two things. One, Um, it's probably because there's something deep in me that's hurt, and I need to heal from my hurt. And what I may need to do, in all honesty, I may need to go sit on somebody's couch, so I can get inner healing, so that I can release the stuff that's inside of me. Because ultimately, when there's stuff inside of us that we need to get out, there's truth that we need to say. If we don't get it out, really all it does is it eats us up from the inside out. And some of the, and we'll talk about this in another way in a much more detailed fashion. But things, some lot of times, people think, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing, so I'm just not going to say nothing, right? Well, there's a truth to that, but then there is a truth that we need to say. And if there's a truth that we need to say and we don't say it, what ends up happening is that we end up swallowing that stuff. And when we swallow it, it turns into resentment, anger, and a bunch of other stuff, depression. It turns into other stuff that we really don't want to deal with. So if a person is never really willing to talk about it, one is probably because there's some deep hurts there and they need to probably sit down with someone and to work through those hurts so that they can release it. The only other thing I could think is that they're not mature. And it's time to, at that point, they need to grow up. They need to mature. And they need to be able to trust God to do the hard thing that God is requiring of them to do. Because again, like I said, it's not a suggestion. It's more of an imperative that we speak the truth in a loving way, right? And so however we need to get ready, we do need to get ready. Sometimes it's good to get a accountability partner, someone else, and practice, right? So there's nothing wrong with that, right? Sometimes you need to practice on somebody. Sometimes you need to pull somebody to the side and say, hey, I got to have a conversation. I don't know how to say this. Let me say it to you how I'm thinking about saying it, and then you tell me what you think about what I said, and then you practice on them, right? And then they'll tell you, And so again, sometimes it's because it also could be I don't know how to say it thing too. So accountability partner may come in handy with that. So hopefully that helps. Okay, question. Man, I got to figure out a way to make this bigger. Oh, hey, I can enlarge my screen. Woo, Jesus, there we go. When you know you have to say something to someone, how do you bring up the matter without the person checking out after you ask the question or comment? That's kind of hard. That's one of those risky things that we deal with when we approach this. But there are a couple of things that we can do in preparation. One is, like I said, practice. Two is set them up, right? And normally that we see that as negative, but I mean it in a positive way. Set them up, right? And what I mean by set them up is just tell them that, I want to have a conversation, and, what I'm going to say, so let me switch it. Here, this is a better way. This is a much better way. Is to let someone know that you want to have a conversation with them, set up the time to have the conversation, and give them a heads up of the topic. That's a much better way. Why? Because, and guys will understand this, what guys hate is when his woman says, we need to talk. You say that to a dude, listen, eyes in the back of the head. I'm done. I don't, we hate that, right? And here's why. Because contrary to popular belief, nobody likes to feel, nobody likes to be ambushed or to feel ambushed or be surprised. And so one of the ways to kind of preempt that, people checking out, is give them a heads up. I want to talk to you about this, right? And don't go into it. Just give them the topic, right? I want to talk about how terrible of a friend you are. No, I want to talk about how we can be better friends, right? And then, right. So you want to make sure you do that right. The other way is that when you open up, you can preempt the conversation, and you can say, listen, what I want to talk to you about is it might be a little difficult. My intention is not to offend, but if you start to feel like you want to check out, please let me know, and we can take a break, right? Why? Because again, it's all about being able to honor the person and the dignity of the other person. And it's hard to dislike when other people give you respect and dignity, right? It's just hard to ignore that. Some people do, but it's just hard to ignore it. So that's a part of the risk that we take, but there is a way to minimize the risk. Okay. Hopefully that helps, Miss Trey. All right. Um, all right. So that's the only questions that I see. All right. So listen, let us have a word of prayer. If I missed any questions, send them to my email, pastor@pfbc1.net, and I will try to answer if I missed anything. I don't think I did, but if I did, just send it to my email, pastor@pfbc1.net. Um, Yeah, Nicole, that's good too. Nicole says, I was told to go outside the regular setting, like go for a walk. Yeah, Nicole, that's brilliant. One of the things, and I will say this, especially for couples, listen to me carefully. Never knew how important this was, but it's important. What you want to do, if you have to have a difficult conversation, don't have that difficult conversation in the same place that you do intimate things with each other, right? Don't do it. Don't do it in the same place where you share happy moments. If you have to have a difficult conversation, find a place, right? Create a place for conversation. And whenever you have to have difficult conversations, go to that place. But don't let your bedroom be that place. Don't let, you know what I mean? Like, if you got a special tree, you know what I mean, that y'all hang around, don't go to the tree and get in an argument. Reserve that for your happy time, special time. So, and it just does something different in the minds of people. Again, getting people out of their environments sometimes changes the attitude of the conversation. So, Nicole, you are 150% right. Yes, ma'am. That's brilliant. All right. So here we go. Let us pray. Our God in heaven, we thank you for blessing all of us to be here tonight. I thank you, Lord, for each and every person that chimed in tonight. I thank you for all of the questions that have been asked. And God, I just thank you for your lesson. Thank you for teaching us through your word. Sometimes your word is difficult, Lord, to adjust to discover, to learn, to know. And even when we know it, it's just hard to do sometimes. Like all of us still have the old self hanging around and the new self that we're trying to put on. And so, God, I'm just asking that you would help all of us make the proper switch tonight. That we put on the new self, and then deal with the old self second. And so, God, I pray that you would help us to get control of our tongues. I pray for the sermon series that we're in, how to not be my own worst enemy. And I'm asking, Lord, that through this series, through the dynamics of this series and the Bible studies that come with it, that you would literally teach us, because many of us have never had it, but teach us how to be our own best friend. And God, I ask that you would do it all in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Thank you guys for tuning in. I love you guys. I promise I do. I'll see you guys on Sunday. And I'll see you on next Wednesday. Fellas, I will see you guys tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, right? Put your spiritual thinking caps on. We got a long way to go and a short time to get there. All right. I love you guys. I'll see you later. God bless. Bye-bye. We're going into the lab. And we are going to do a couple of experiments to